gonna work, is it? The light giving me a little bit of hell. I'll put it on this side then, that's fine. As always, just gonna slide off. We'll just put it on my lap then. This is growing pains. Have a little sip of my Joey Burst. Shout out to Brad Woodgate, the founder of Joy Burst, for making such a bomb-ass drink, dude. Bottoms up. Whew. We got ourselves a fire here, got a fire out there. Welcome. Welcome, guys. Welcome you. You watching this to my first 2026 YouTube video. Doing a little bit of a test here, something different than what I originally planned, because I was thinking about doing this early in the morning. So tomorrow's video will be me setting this up at like 5 a.m. for a 6 a.m. call time, essentially. And orienting my day, but right now it's 5:56 p.m. January 17th, 2026. And I wanted to give this format a test. Which is really just me sitting here chatting to the camera, which I don't do very often. Not that I'm uncomfortable with it, it's just I don't believe the best use of the medium. That being said, there's a lot on my mind. I have a lot to say. I have a lot to think about. And I believe there's value that I can provide anybody listening, even if that's myself later. So this exercise for me is really just to have a deep and honest conversation with myself and leave that conversation for my future self to look back and to be proud that I'm even doing this. Today started with The Forge. It's a men's group that I created with Anthony Valtsinas. And The Forge is really about helping men go from boys to men, and men worthy of being fathers, husbands, and partners, whether that be fathers biologically or, them wanting to mentor somebody. I should fix this. Hold on. Before I continue. How's this doing with heat? Oh, it's all good. It's going to actually crack. I don't know. We'll see. Anyway. Yeah, even if it's not biologically, like, if you want to mentor somebody, you're technically fathering them. You're being paternal. And I think that's really important to recognize and understand that, showing up as a man is not just a man biologically, but also in relationship to how you show up to everybody else. And I do believe that there is an expectation for you as a man, societally, biologically, to show up in a certain way, in a certain light. And people do project these expectations onto us. So having a safe space to learn about them and not to feel this shame, I think, is really important for the men of this age, which is why Anthony and I created it. And part of that meeting for myself was me expressing that I want to really accept the shame that I carry, and not just accept it, but share it in a way that I'm proud. And all of 2025, I wanted to do what I'm doing now, which is sit down and start just creating some content. But it was difficult because I was battling a lot of identity crises and guilt and shame, and really not accepting myself for who I am naturally, wanting to put myself in a box and in a mold before I do anything. And on one hand, I agree that planning and doing things intentionally is really important, though I also recognize that action is better than inaction, and a lot of 2025 for me was inaction due to shame, guilt, cringe, and lack of self-love and compassion. So this year we're changing that, and my challenge for this month was to turn my camera on, capture, and publish my first video on LinkedIn and YouTube. So that's what we're doing. We're doing it right now. I didn't want to wait until tomorrow for things to be perfect, which is why we're doing it now. And I think my format will be early morning recordings, because that's where I have my peace, my alone time. But for right now, I'm happy and I'm proud that I'm even here doing this as I am, showing up. And, to show up in general, I mean, even if you're not a man, I just think just as a person, seems hard nowadays because there's a lot of these signals that are telling you that the way that you're showing up is wrong. And the way that you're showing up needs to be improved. But I really believe that just showing up is the most important piece of the equation. And even if you miss the mark or you don't show up properly, you give yourself the opportunity to learn what showing up properly really looks like. I am going to have to fix this problem. One sec. Okay, we're back. And we're rolling. All right. So, I don't really remember exactly what I was talking about. I had to solve a quick emergency. My little fire in front of me was on something that could not support the fire itself. Now I think we're good and okay. I hope the sheet of metal can handle it without melting. If it starts melting, we'll have the same problem, and I'll figure it out later. But, the transition from being a boy to a man, I believe, is starting to do things that you have the responsibility to do, but maybe not always the stuff that you necessarily want to do, which comes with discipline. But I also think it comes with a paradigm and a belief structure that motivates you and moves you towards the directions of the things that you need to do. And if at the end of the day you genuinely don't truly believe that it is your duty or your responsibility, I think it's hard to change that. It always starts with belief, because all of your needs are perceived. And once you understand that needs come from your internal perception, you also begin to start to realize that there's a lot of stuff that's hacking your perception or molding your perception. And maybe this isn't just for men, but I think, like, in general, going from a child to an adult is recognizing that, like, you get to form those beliefs and make the rules of the game. And until you begin to build that relationship with yourself and that autonomy, unless you have a really strong infrastructure and network, I think it's, like, really tough to make that transition, because the world externally is trying to push you and move you into a certain direction. And when you start to lose that external validation without forming an internal relationship to make those decisions and to form those beliefs, you're really lost. And I personally struggled a lot with my internal beliefs. You know, I am 29 years old. I'm going to be 30 in a few months. And there's a really core part of my identity that believes, truly and wholeheartedly that I'm not supposed to be here right now. And the timeline that I'm a part of is borrowed, not self-made, not actualized, not mine. And I feel like I'm in the wrong timeline. Like really the wrong timeline. And in this point in my life, I really only have a few options when it comes to the belief structure. I can either hold on to that belief and carry it through, which, if we weigh pros and cons on one hand, I see a lot of the pros. Though on the other hand, I think the amount of loss and the cons outweigh it so much that even if it was an emotional decision, it could never actually outweigh the logic of that decision. Because I do also have the belief in me and this part of my identity that's extremely ambitious, and I do believe that I have a lot to do in this life and in this world, and that I was put here for a strong purpose, and that purpose hasn't been achieved yet. So I'm not allowed to give in to that other voice of mine. And that voice stems from, I was supposed to be at a certain level of success or threshold by 25, and I'm 4 years late. And every year after, well, almost 5 years now, every year after, missing the goal has slowly accrued more and more soul and emotional weight. Now, in my case, where it's a little bit more obvious, and even though I'm saying this out loud, it took me literally 3.5 years to have the self-realization of what I'm talking about right now. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to get into it fully. Actually, maybe I should. I told myself, I had a promise that by 25, I would have $1 million in the bank account. Otherwise, the only other option was to blow my brains out or to jump off a building or really just to end my life. And that mentality came from the context in which I was living in, because the timeline would have, at 25, allowed me to take guardianship of my 2 little sisters, who 4 years ago would have still been in middle school, and I believe at the prime age for me to really help mature and parent them into people that I think would do themselves proud. And without achieving that goal, I am now living in this timeline where I'm seeing the consequences of me not reaching that mission and that goal. And on one hand, I can see the motivation behind that, but in the other, it's like I'm really just living this hell that I knew was coming. And I think the reason that I wanted to end my life was because I didn't really want to see this timeline out, if I'm being honest. Now that I'm here and I've been living it, I do recognize all the stuff that I would have been missing. It's just also at the same time very difficult to remove that perspective entirely. And over the last few months, trying to have self-compassion and self-love and discipline whilst also grieving that identity and everything that should have come with it has been hard. It's been very difficult because there's a lot of resentment that comes with me and myself, and honestly not living out the promise that I gave to myself. There's an integrity that has been shattered internally. And before that moment, I never had that issue that I think a lot of other people have. Internally, I had a very strong relationship with myself. And what I'm learning in this stage of my life is how to repair that relationship and build it from the ground up as an adult. And I'm really happy and proud to say, being on here, having a conversation openly is leading me towards that reality. And I'm proud of that. One more thing I really want to talk about, and I need to get this off my chest. I will definitely make something else about this, but I want to talk about video and what video is, okay? So I started my business in, 2018 or 2019 or something like that, and it was a video production company. And in the few years that I really focused on video, I came to a realization that most human beings don't actually look at video for what it is and understand at its core how to leverage it properly. So I'm going to break this down into two parts. There's the creating of the video and then the consumption of the video, okay? And on the creating side, there's something beautiful that we've done in this interaction that's happening right now. You aren't interacting with me. You're interacting with my clone. And you're interacting actually with a perfect clone. This process that we're going through right now is capturing me as I am. And what do I mean by this? Well, very simply put, cloning somebody, at least science fiction depicted, is taking a piece of their DNA and putting that in a machine and watching a second of them grow. The problem that I have with this is the reality that that clone at some point will become its own person with its own memories, its own experiences, thoughts, ideas. And as much as the base might have started from where I came from at the time, contextually, I think the end point is different. Whereas what you're watching right now is a perfect clone of me in January 17th, 2026. You are seeing me today as I am, as I was. I mean, right now as I am, but really for you as I was. Because as we get into the second part of video, which is the consumption, if the first part of producing is really cloning, either an environment, a space, or a person, or people, or subjects, the second part of it on the consumption side is time travel. What you're watching right now is a window into time. You get to step into January 17th, 2026 through a window. And that's insane. Like, really, at its core fundamental level, it is absolutely fascinating. And when you look at it from those two perspectives alone, it changes how well you can really utilize this piece of medium. And the reason it's important to utilize this medium versus maybe writing or taking photos is, simply put, every word is a false representation of an experience, right? So if you and I say the word cat, a specific type of cat might have popped up into your mind, or even mine at the time of me rewatching this. And the cat that I'm thinking about in my head is different. And that's just from one word, cat. And when you think about, in language, how sometimes words have their own specific definitions that are based on context and time and society or use, communicating through words alone is fickle. It actually, I don't know if it really makes much sense. And then if we transition into photos, they always say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, if we talk about the base of the words have their own definitions, and the 1,000 words that come into my mind when I see a picture, the subjectiveness, might be different than the 1,000 words that come into your mind. So then this leads us into video. The video that you're watching right now is shot in 24 frames per second. That's 24 pictures every second. Theoretically, that's 24,000 words a second of information that you're downloading right now. Whether that be the context of the fire and how it's slowly falling, the other fire over there that's dimming, the grave of the bunny that I dug, the snow, the silhouettes of the trees, maybe my cadence, how I'm moving, my tone. There's a lot of information you're downloading right now on the consumption side. And that's why we're moving away from a literate society. We're literally becoming illiterate because we are more naturally inclined to learn and digest information the way that we did when we were children, which is audio and visual. Your parents don't bring you into the world with scripture and, encyclopedia. They show you the world and they model it in front of you and then they speak to you. It's a show and a tell situation. And video on the education side, I mean, there's nothing better than the medium that we have right now in moving pictures when it comes to learning about the world and experiencing it as close as you can, as you were learning as a child. So you remove a lot of friction, lots of friction, and you make the process more natural. And I think it's really important for the world to see it that way, and I hope that later in this year I will make something that really showcases what I'm talking about versus just saying it, because I think the show is an important part about the show and tell aspect of education and learning, and using video as a whole. So now as my first light is dimming, I'm going to sign off, but I want to thank you guys for watching. If you did stick around this far, thank you for listening to me yap. If you liked what you saw, let me know by hitting the like and maybe the subscribe. But really leave me a comment. If anything that I talked about sparked any thought, I want to have conversations with anybody watching this. I really do. And I hope I see you in the next one. Cheers.